Today is May the 19th in 2023. Welcome to the Chapter 49 podcast. Always happy to welcome all of you who are watching or listening to our podcast. We have a video that goes up on YouTube, and we have, of course, the audio version. Most people listen to our podcast. We have a few people who actually can stand to watch my face for a half an hour. Not too many people can do that. My name is Larry Lannan. I am a retiree, and I am a volunteer with Chapter 49 doing communication work, mostly this podcast. So we're always happy to have you, and we're very pleased that you have chosen to spend some time with us today. And spending time with all of you today, Duncan Giles, Chapter President for Chapter 49. Welcome back, Duncan.
Thanks, Larry. Good to be here. And my best side on to be viewed is at the bottom of the coal mine at midnight on a very dark and stormy night.
So you're saying we're going to start doing the podcast differently now?
For those people who want to watch it and view it, God bless you.
Well, now, we did it on audio only, sound only for a long time. We added the video just to see if people were interested. And we do have a small but dedicated group that seem to enjoy watching the video. But I think most people who consume a podcast are doing something else. They're in a car, maybe they're working, or they're working at home, or doing the dishes, or mowing the lawn. So that's how I always used to consume podcasts, and still do to some extent. So I think that's where a lot of people do it. And if you want to watch the video, we just have it there for you if you wish to consume it that way. Well, we're getting into some nice late spring, early summer weather in central Indiana. Feels great. Getting outside is always a lot of fun this time of year. So we hope wherever you live, you're having the same experience this time of year. Let's get into our issues this week. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about the debt ceiling, the in-person training, attrition rates for new hires. Boy, there are some eye-popping numbers there. How you can use the NTEU app on your phone, communications, where we think there could be some improvements everywhere in the service, and all about that pilot program where people filing their taxes can file directly electronically with the IRS, which has never been available before. You always had to go through a third party. So we're going to talk about all that. Let's start off with the debt ceiling. We keep talking about that. As we record this early in the morning on the 19th day of May 2023, the talks continue. The president's overseas for an international meeting, although he's cutting that short to come back and try to wrap up this debt ceiling deal. So remind us, Duncan, why this debt ceiling issue is so important to all of us.
Yeah, again, this is not something that is for future budgets. This is to pay the bills for budgets that have already come past and already been done. And the full faith in government, full faith in payment for the government of the United States is something that has to be done. And so the system that's been set up decades and decades ago is to pass the debt ceiling to allow it to grow when we have deficits. And if the debt ceiling is not passed, then there could be a lot of bad ramifications. The main one for federal employees is A, we wouldn't be receiving paychecks. B, we don't know if we'd have to come to work without receiving paychecks, or we'd just be staying home. There's just a great deal of unknowns, aside from the fact that you can watch things like your thrift savings plan accounts tank, as well as the stock market, higher interest rates, things of that nature. So it's just something that is very, very bad for federal employees and the world economy as a whole. So it's something we don't want to have, and we hope to get this wrapped up sooner rather than later, because even though we didn't have one back in 2011, it's the last time it got this close, it downgraded, as you said, our last podcast by Moody's, the United States credit rating. And, it's taken a long time to try and build that goodwill back up, even though the credit rating hasn't been raised. So this is not a good thing for anybody at this point.
I was watching some television this morning before we record this, and there were some foreign policy experts, and their comment was this, that the people who really are enjoying watching this whole debt ceiling debacle, the Chinese, because they feel like we are leaving them an international void where they can move in. So need to be considering that as well.
Yeah, it absolutely has geopolitical impact all over the world because, a lot of countries are looking at the United States going, why do you continue to shoot yourselves in the foot with this? There has to be a better system for you guys to do this rather than continue to play this brinkmanship game every time this issue comes up. And, sometimes under the previous administration, never a problem in getting it raised. But when you have differing political factions, it creates this political football with a debt ceiling that should not be a political football. You want to discuss budget issues, how money should be spent, things of that nature? Absolutely. Understand that 100%, that there are a lot of differing opinions and that has to be worked out. But to pay the bills that have already been incurred, that shouldn't even be a discussion.
One thing that we keep reminding people, and this is something that I think we all need to take into consideration when we hear these debates, this particular debate. The debt ceiling is actually an artificial creation of the Congress, which began in World War I when the president at that time was having trouble getting the money he needed to fight World War I. In order to get enough votes to pass the budget, he had to put this debt ceiling in. Okay, you can pass a debt ceiling, but if we have to go over a certain amount, the Congress will be given the opportunity to say yes or no on raising that debt limit. Congress tomorrow, or actually today when we're speaking, if the Congress wanted to do it, the Congress could eliminate the debt ceiling, period. And there's some constitutional scholars that think that the debt ceiling isn't even constitutional because of the 14th Amendment. I'm not enough of a lawyer to understand that, but there's at least one law professor at Harvard, Lawrence Tribe, who's considered one of the great legal minds of our time, who flat out says that Congress doesn't even have the right to have a debt limit, that the American debt is guaranteed with or without the debt limit being raised. So there's all these discussions going on. But I do think that the idea is let's get a deal so there's an agreement amongst all the parties. Nobody has to go to court over the 14th Amendment to see whether the debt limit is constitutional. But we all do need to understand that if the debt limit isn't raised, it will wreck our economy. It could wreck the international economy. And on top of that, we don't know the true impact on federal employees, whether we would simply be sent home, be required to work without pay or reduce pay. I mean, it's just not known. It's a place we don't want to go.
Right. And I was not there when they created the debt ceiling, like you said, around World War I, or certainly not when it was, the 14th Amendment was passed. Contrary to what my partner Kim or my daughter Maddie might say, I was not around back during those times. But I mean, I can't believe that would ever have been the intent for those folks who were involved in this to see this kind of issue it's become now, to have this come up. I just cannot fathom that anyone would ever have this intent.
One other aspect we need to keep an eye on, Duncan, as far as this debt ceiling situation is concerned, there are some people in Congress who are using this debt ceiling drama to reduce the IRS budget annually and to do away with what's left of our $80 billion in extra funding over the next several years. So will that be a part of a final deal? We certainly hope not, but it's something we need to keep an eye on, and we will do that. Hopefully by the next time you and I have a podcast, we'll have this all will be over. We'll be talking about whatever agreement there is. But if there is some deal at the end, let's hope IRS doesn't get the short end of that deal.
Absolutely. And that's something that NTU National is looking at very closely and talking to folks on the Hill of both parties about the ramifications of this. Our national president, Tony Reardon, and national VP, Doreen Greenwald, and our legislative folks are all over this because they know that, we're just starting to turn our ship around. We're getting more, better rates on answering taxpayers' phone calls. We're getting more folks out in the field for revenue officers, revenue agents, tax compliance officers, folks build up in TAS to deal with the issues that come up, as well as phone people and folks in the service centers. So we don't want to have a reversal of that and a bloodbath if our budget gets cut or the Inflation Reduction Act funds get pulled. So I think everybody realizes that that would be a very bad idea and not helpful to anyone.
So our point is we just know that that has been brought up as an issue by people who want to reduce our budget. So let's just, I'm not saying it will happen, but it is in the mix of those talks. So we will keep a close eye on that. Moving on to another issue. With people being hired now under the Inflation Reduction Act money we do have available at the IRS, we of course have more training classes coming up. During the pandemic, there was a move toward online training, and it kind of started even before that. Online training is cheaper, but is it better? I think most, how should I put this? Most studies, most experts in the area of training and education will tell you in-person training is always the absolute best way to do that. Well, now we have new employees that are being brought into the service. So, Duncan, you and I have talked about this before. What do we know now? To what extent do we know whether the new employees will be getting this in-person training, or will there be efforts by the service to save some money and do this online?
Yes, to both questions. We've heard some of the divisions in the IRS have realized that the online training is not at all conducive for them and are starting to go to more in-person training. They've got the funding now to do this, and they know that in-person is more effective because it's not just the training, but it's the discussion that comes up, the questions that come up, the interactions. Oh, I didn't realize that, but I was going to ask that. And what happens if this? Oh, I'm glad they asked that, so I know this. So it makes for a much better learning environment for the way that we work and the jobs that we have for us to do it in person. Now, I know that there are still a lot of positions out there, such as on the phones for accounts management. They're still doing online training, and we're pushing back hard. NTU nationally and locally is pushing back as hard as we can to try and start turning that ship away from the iceberg and let's go back to more in-person training. Well, we don't have we're hiring in such numbers, we don't have the facilities to train them in person. Find it, rent it. I mean, this isn't rocket science. That's what we've done in the past when we've had large classes. Because if you don't have those in-person classes, it's just not going to be near as effective, and you're not serving the American taxpayers near as well.
As somebody who's been an instructor a number of times internally, we had plenty of rented space in the past. So the idea that we as a service, or the service itself, does not have the space. Well, maybe there isn't government space there, but services rented space all the time for training classes and other purposes. So I find that a bit of a strange excuse.
Yeah, there are many of us, like I said, both nationally and locally, who are trying to dismantle that as much as possible. And it's also a mindset of trying to get folks out of the pandemic back into more of the normal, since the pandemic emergency has been declared over by the president and by health officials. So we need to start going back to that pre-pandemic mindset where we need to get these folks in person. Yes, there is a cost for this, but it's something that is absolutely going to be money well spent down the road.
Yeah, you begin to wonder just what is the definition of normalcy in this day and age.
Yeah, well, I'm the wrong one to ever ask about anything normal because that's not me. But it's something that, yeah, it's just trying to figure that out. And you have the different divisions. Again, we're not one IRS, we're still 12 IRSs or more, and everybody's still operating a little bit differently, making their own decisions. And hopefully, as we become one IRS again, which is the goal, I know, to start being more cohesive and start acting the same in things like training across all divisions.
And Duncan, you and I are been around long enough to remember the days of the district directors. And we would have disagreements amongst the various, like the examination division in the old days, collection, customer service, even criminal investigation was part of NTU, but it was part of the district. District director would just knock heads and make a decision and move on. It would settle these issues. There's really not a good way to settle these disagreements amongst the various 12 or more IRSs. Isn't that part of the problem?
Absolutely, yeah. Until you get up to a deputy commissioner level, there really isn't. I have gotten good vibes off of Commissioner Werfel. I think that he realizes that this is an issue. He's very much pro-employee and wanting to do things the right way, because he realizes the more that employees are trained well and are engaged and things of that nature, the better off it'll be, not just for the service, but for the American taxpayer. So I'm hoping that he's going to take steps to try and get this type of thing straightened out to make it better for everyone.
I think these are related issues. One issue about more in-person training is related to this next issue, and we're beginning to see some numbers on attrition rates. And when we talk about attrition rates, we're talking about people who are hired for positions at the IRS and fail to stay there very long. We're seeing attrition rates. I'll let you go through it. The percentages are astounding, and it's very expensive when you hire people and bring them in, and then they leave not within a few months, and you have to go right back up to the square one and start the hiring process again. So it's expensive, and it makes things more difficult in terms of bringing people on. What do we know now about some of these attrition rates?
Yeah, we've recently found out that the attrition rates in many of these positions that we're hiring for are anywhere from 20, more commonly 25%, up to 40%, which is, like you said, an astoundingly high number to have happen. So, your revenue agents, revenue officers are in the 25 to 30%, along with TCOs. And then when you get to things like automated collection and accounts management for calls, like the people who answer the phones, it's closer to 40%, as are a lot in submission processing. So in our service centers, it's just astounding to me that they're that high. We're bringing people in, and for whatever reason, and you're always going to have a certain amount of fallout. These jobs are not for everyone. That's understood. That's okay. But to have it at that high a level, there's a problem somewhere that needs to be addressed. Do I think the lack of in-person training is part of it? I absolutely do. But we've got to get this figured out, and quickly, to be able to make sure that that we get this rate down to something much more manageable.
Other than the training issue you just went over, does management have any data, or have they dug in behind the numbers to try to understand? I mean, there's going to be an attrition rate. There always will be. This is extremely high. Any idea as to why the service, other than the in-person training, might be having, such high attrition rates?
We have not seen any data behind that. I think they are digging. I think once the IRS management heard these numbers, it surprised them as well. They knew that there was a high attrition. I don't think they realized it was quite as high as it is. So I think that they're trying now to get behind these numbers. We've never done really well at things like exit surveys to find out why people leave, which I think is extremely important in somebody that's leaving in their first couple of years. Why are you leaving? Is it someplace that's, offering you more money or a better work environment, or what is going on? And that definitely needs to be improved. I am hoping that engagement improves some under the commissioner, and some people coming back to that area that will hopefully try and change some of this culture of the IRS, so that we can retain more of these folks that are coming in, because we need everybody that's coming in. Every good quality person we can get, we need to keep.
Well, let's move on to another issue. You and I talked about this some weeks ago. NTEU has now unveiled and rolled out an app, a phone app you can use on your cell phone, where you can get your information. You've got your sign-on information you use online. You can use that for the NTEU phone app as well. I've had that for a while, and I must say, what I like most about it is if there's an important issue that's come up, you get a little indicator on your phone that something's important is there. You need to go and look at it. But the NTU app has a number of good functionalities on it you can use as an NTEU member. So, talk a little bit more about what's on that NTEU app, and if you're not on it, why you should be.
Yeah, like you said, the main thing I think is, and I give a lot of credit to our folks behind the scenes, our um, you know, folks like Sheila McCormick in our public relations area, who've really pushed for having this type of thing, and folks in her shop. It's something like, something important issue is coming on. They want NTU wants to make sure that you're aware of it. They don't want to spam you. They don't want to send a ton of emails, things of that nature. But they want to make sure that you have the information that you need to be aware of. So they send that out. If you need to, contact your congressperson or your senator about a particular issue, that's very easy to do through that NTU app. If you're looking at discounts that might be out there for hotels, for car rental discounts, other discounts that are out there, you can easily access it through the app and have the information there so you can save yourself some money. So it's just a really convenient thing to have on your phone along with your other apps to, basically improve your work life and possibly save you some money in the promotions things that we offer.
I don't know how many bargaining unit people have a government cell phone, but if it so happens that you are a member of NTEU and you have a government cell phone, piece of advice, do not download the app on your government phone. Do it on your personal phone.
Yeah, I would not download the app on a government phone. That would not be fun. You don't want to download games, the NTU app, or a host of other things that you might be willing to do on your personal phone that you would not ever want to do on your government phone.
I would really not want to look at that list. So we'll just.
I'm not old enough to look at that list. I'll tell you that much.
You are old enough, Duncan. Okay. One of the things that you and I decided we wanted to talk about in this podcast is this whole issue of communications. When I was a union steward and a union official, I always felt that communication was a big part of my job, and I did it on many different levels. I communicated, of course, with the chapter president at the time. I communicated closely with the management officials if I was trying to work out an issue, and of course, always communicating directly with the employees who asked for my help, whom I was representing in any way. So I think that every level communications are important. When I was a manager, I worked very hard. You're never perfect on this, but I did the best I could to communicate with my employees directly and in a way that I thought was productive, and tried to keep that line of communication open at all times so they felt comfortable coming to me if they had. And I think, being a good manager, part of it is where your employees feel comfortable coming to you if there's bad news, because managers need to know it if there's bad news going on. But I think this whole idea of improving communications at every level, are you seeing this as, how should I put this, a priority of the service management at this point?
I'm not sure. I think they do know that they need to improve communication, but I don't think they realize how bad the problem has gotten. And I do ascribe some of this to the pandemic where people were isolated. They weren't seeing their manager that often. But I've seen an awful lot of examples where people are surprised by something their manager has done on their appraisal because they haven't talked, they haven't communicated. On the flip side, there are a lot of things that could be solved if an employee would reach out and actually talk to their manager and communicate with them. But they don't want to do that. It's become more isolated. You're just wanting to basically hermetically seal yourself up in your workplace at home rather than talk or go in or communicate with your manager. The thing you said about communicating with different management officials is so very important, that there needs to be more open dialogues to solve issues. And, when there is an open dialogue, when you can't sit down and talk to somebody, you get more grievances, you get more arbitrations, you're not able to solve problems, you're just at loggerheads, which doesn't benefit anybody, especially the employees who are here to serve the taxpayers. So you want to try and do what you can for them. So communication to me at every level, and being as transparent as possible. If something's coming down, let the employees know. If, like you said, if the employee's got an issue or they see an issue, they need to let their manager know, because the manager can't fix it if they don't know about it. So I urge everybody at every level, from the commissioner on down, to make sure that they're communicating as much as they can, as openly as they can, and be as transparent as they can to try and make interaction better for everyone.
Our last regular topic for this podcast I need to go back in time a little bit to give some history on this, because I remember when this program rolled out, what they called the e-file program at IRS. And I got to know the lady who was our first coordinator of that program at what was then the Indiana district, and talked to her a little bit about how the service was trying to get this rolling. And this was before people had computers in their homes or cell phones or anything like that. And the program rolled out mainly with a partnership with H&R Block at the time, so that Block would communicate. In other words, they would file the return electronically because people didn't have their own computers to do it. And basically, her point to me was, we have to deal with blocks, because if it wasn't for Block, we wouldn't have an e-file program. And that's really how it got started. Now, Block, of course, is still part of that. Intuit is now a big thing, TurboTax. I actually worked for Intuit for a tax season after I retired. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is there has been a major movement on this whole e-file issue, because the tax filing industry, Intuit, Block, and a number of other companies who are into filing tax returns electronically, have always wanted to have the corner on the market. They never wanted the public to be able to electronically file a return for free directly to the IRS. That was going to obviously hurt their business. They've lobbied very hard to keep it that way. But the Inflation Reduction Act had a provision in there that IRS was to study and do a pilot program where regular taxpayers can directly file electronically with the IRS for free without going through Intuit, Block, or any other number of other companies. So that pilot project is going to happen there when the 2023 returns are filed in 2024. I'm curious, what's the buzz you're hearing about this internally?
Internally, there hasn't been much discussion, which has surprised me. I think that it's a wonderful thing. As like I said, as you and I both know, they used to take returns at our walk-in offices many, many years ago, but they stopped doing that. And I think there's a lot of external pressure from certain companies to not have the IRS do this. Oh, it's a horrible idea. It's going to, make everything messed up. And I don't know how it's going to be messed up, but okay. But it's one of those things where Commissioner Werfel has said, you know what, the way we want to pilot this and the way we want it to roll out is, if you want the IRS to do your return, you can. They'll do it, and we'll do it for free. If you want to pay, if you've got a favorite preparer at a big company, or you like the big companies that are online, the H&R Blocks, the Jackson Hewitts, the TurboTaxes, what have you, you can do that. If you have an accountant that you really like and trust, you can do that, because there are a lot of people that say, well, if I go through the IRS, I'm not going to get the biggest refund possible, or they're not going to take advantage of everything. Okay, that's fine. We're giving options, and we're trying to help people. The VITA program that we talked about last week is a wonderful program for folks to be able to, at certain income levels, to be able to file those for free. One of the things that we are looking at, and I think we're going to have to work through during this pilot, is the advantage of electronic filing with one place is you can do your federal and your state together. And so you don't really want to have a situation where the IRS does the taxes, we take care of the taxes for the federal. Well, you're still going to have to figure out the state, and you may still have to go through a company for that. So I think there's some issues to be worked, but I think it's a very good program. I think we're on the right track in doing this. And I'm hoping in the years to come that it'll be very successful for the taxpayers, and that's who it's ultimately for.
And as I understand it, I have also, how should I put this? I've used some of those companies to file online, and some of them market this saying, "Well, okay, we'll give you if you buy our software, you can file your federal tax return, e-file it for free," and that's true. However, they will charge you to file the state return. That's something they don't always tell you. Although, and another thing is, not every state has an income tax. My daughter's family lives in South Dakota, and they don't have an income tax there. So they file a federal income tax return, and they don't file a state income tax return. So there's a lot involved there. Okay, Duncan, your final comment for this podcast.
My final comment is, again, you always hear me talk about work-life balance, and life is about experiences to me. And, I urge everyone to do memorable experiences with those they love or friends. My partner, Kim, who's absolutely awesome, is down right now in North Carolina for a couple of days, just having fun, meeting with a friend so that they can go through things like the Biltmore. It's a, very rare experience, but they're experiencing it together. And those are the things that you remember, whether it's going to a major league game, going to a football game or whatever it may be. Always try and look for those experiences, whether they cost anything or they're free, that you can do with those that you love, be it your family, your spouse, your friends, whoever it is, to try and remember those, because those are the things I think that you really treasure, and they also help recharge your battery, so you can come in and do the work that you need to do. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, my quick message is this. We're getting into the time of year where people are out on the water and lakes and rivers and that kind of thing. So please keep in mind water safety. There's one thing I want people need to remember. If you're driving a boat, you still can't drink, folks. There is such a thing as drunken driving on a boat. So let's make sure you have a designated driver on the boat as well as your car, and just remember, as you get back into the water in many parts of the country where the weather is just beginning to warm up, enjoy it, but be safe as you venture out into the water. I love the water myself. So if you do as well, you're out on the beach, wherever you may be, or just having a good time on the water, the lake, make sure you're safe. And we want you to stay safe as we end this Chapter 49 podcast for the 19th day of May, 2023. Again, we do appreciate the fact you've taken some time out of your busy day to watch or listen to our podcast. If you have any comments about the podcast or questions or issues you'd like us to talk about, send us an email, nteu49@aol.com. That's the email address. Feel free to send anything there. And also, if you'd like to just get regular updates as to when these podcasts are available, Duncan can send you links. In the meantime, please be safe and be kind.